Chapter 1. Introduction to Stoicism. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. If you're into self-help and personal development, you've most likely come across the terms Stoicism and Stoic philosophy a lot these days. Unlike a fancy-sounding pop psychology trend or personal development quick fix, Stoicism is a powerful ancient Greek philosophy concept. It was first introduced by Greek philosopher Zeno of Citium as far back as 300 BC as a modification of Cynicism, which talks about self-control, restraint, and fortitude for combating destructive and harmful emotions. Stoicism, in principle, doesn't call for completely demolishing emotions, but restructuring them through asceticism, abstinence from pleasures of the world, which eventually leads the individual to attain clearer judgment, a strong sense of inner calmness, and liberation from suffering and misery. The ultimate goal of Stoicism is freeing your life from suffering. As an ethical concept, Stoicism aims to offer the individual freedom from anguish or misery through a dedicated pursuit of reason, objectivity, a non-emotional mindset, and clear judgment. It teaches the value of equanimity or balance in the course of both life's ups and downs. Stoicism calls for a more passive or unaffected reaction to external circumstances as a means of eliminating our suffering and bringing greater balance to our existence. The term Stoic is borrowed from stoapokele, which translates into painted porch, which is where Zeno Citium 335 to 263 BCE taught. In contemporary parlance, it simply refers to a person who is emotionally detached and apathetic to pain, pleasure, happiness, or grief. Though it does borrow from its philosophical roots, Stoicism has attained far more modern bearings that can be easily applied in everyday life for leading a more balanced lifestyle. Stoicism was comprised of three primary areas: ethics, physics, and logic. Physics dealt with the modern-day metaphysics or science. In terms of Stoic logic, it consisted what we know today as psychology or social sciences. It involved rhetoric, knowledge theory, and epistemology. The Stoic understanding and structure of logic were another version of Aristotle's idea of logic, which was overlooked through the Middle Ages until it gained precedence during the onset of propositional logic. One mustn't really view Stoicism as a bundle of theoretical beliefs or ethics. It can be seamlessly merged into an individual's everyday life through training, absorption, and practice. If anything, Stoicism is a way of life. It can involve everything from self-dialogue to mindfulness to death contemplation. Ancient Roman and Greek philosophers did not view mind philosophy as a separate subject or field of knowledge. What the contemporary world considers areas related to the philosophy of the mind, intelligence, memory, imagination, emotion, etc., were talked about under the peripsyches, translates to on the soul. Thus, the ideas and tenets of ancient Stoicism are applicable under the modern philosophy of the mind and psychological philosophy. Stoicism and philosophy of the mind. Ancient Greek philosophers greatly differed in their concept of the mind as opposed to past Cartesian contemporary ideas. When modern thinkers view the mind and body as two distinct and contrasting planes of an individual's existence. When you are asked to define the mind, you would probably relate it to intelligence or cognitive abilities. The Greeks viewed the soul as an all-encompassing or broader entity that was entwined with a person's physical functions. The soul was the central principle of existence. It was through the soul that the body is guided. In addition to directing our thoughts, perceptions, imagination, and logic, the soul was also believed to be responsible for our bodily functions or biological processes by the ancient Greek thinkers. It was the soul which, in their books, guided bodily functions such as breathing, digestion, procreation, movement, and so on. The Pythagoreans and Plato were as close as the Greek philosophers could get to the more modern Cartesian principles of the soul. However, Stoicism was another school of thought that had its roots firmly entrenched in the physicalist soul concept. Zeno of Citium, Stoicism's father, was essentially keen on studying the nature of the human soul. Along with his disciple Cleanthes, 331 to 232 BCE, Zeno ascribed a kind of active energy to the mind. It was some sort of inner heat or fire that channelized the mind according to their train of thought. Stoicism, or Stoic philosophy psychology, reached its pinnacle when Chrysippus, 280 to 207 BCE, elaborated how the soul is made of a material called pneuma, and how cognitive functions were a direct result of the pneuma functions. The presence of pneuma wasn't related merely to the soul, but also was believed to be the central organizing concept of the cosmos, or soul of the world at large. This cosmos soul, or world soul, was closely interlinked with God, with thinkers defining the Almighty as that intelligent and artistic fire which creates, organizes, and expands the cosmos. God is often referred to as the pneuma that is omnipresent in the entire cosmos along with the human soul. It is believed to transcend the temporary body. Directly opposed to modern physics and principles of cosmology, Stoic thinkers viewed the world as a breathing, living organism. Stoic psychology closely overlaps with cosmology and even Stoic physics. The Stoics mainly viewed the human soul as a combination of air and fire. A section of Stoic thinkers saw it as a creation of evolved fire, like ether or fundamental heat energy. It was believed that pneuma prevalent in the soul was, in essence, a part of the divine pneuma channeling the cosmos. The human soul was therefore seen as being central to an individual's existence, awarding us with reason, balance, and cognitive powers. Stoic thinkers often argued that the soul, in fact, is a distinct body part that possesses the corporeal substance. Stoicism didn't think of the soul as matter, which is why Stoicism was mainly referred to Stoic philosophy or physicalist. Matter, as present in each bodily substance in Stoic philosophy, was viewed as one of the two fundamental principles defining each bodily substance. The two principles were active matter and active reason, or logos, or the Almighty. These two primary corporeal principles were said to guide the structure and motion of every physical substance. Both the principles were believed to coexist, and one couldn't view them in isolation or distinct from each other. Physical substances possess both active and passive. However, one takes precedence or dominates over the other, thus making the being more rational, active, or material, passive. Stoic thinkers also ascribed an active or passive quality to fundamental elements such as water, air, fire, and earth. While water and earth were believed to be increasingly passive, air and fire were guided by heavily active principles. The latter was linked to cognitive powers. Stoic philosophers were of the opinion that while the human soul was nourished from passive elements, a distinct activity associated with active elements distinguishes the living from the non-living. Pneuma and scala naturae. In a complete antithesis to the theory of atomists, Stoic thinkers believed in a sort of continuum concept that defied the presence of any void within the universe or cosmos. The cosmos was, in fact, viewed as a single entity charged with pneuma. Each substance was said to possess a qualitative metric based on the level of pneuma, stimulated substance. The pneuma is believed to move from the focal point to the outer surface, and from the outer surface back to the center. Passive elements induce low levels of bodily activity, while fire and air, active elements, possess increasingly high tensional motion. The Stoics predictably classified all materials based on a hierarchical grading system or scala natura. By the term itself, you realize that materials are graded based on their inherent nature. This principle of pneuma and tension in motion let the Stoics create a more all-encompassing theory, simultaneously coexisting with a concept that differentiated between biological and non-biological substances. Eventually, the Stoics concluded that there's a strong correlation between the human mind and matter. There was little place for the modern mind over matter adage. The scala natura is nothing but hierarchy or graded classification based on the structure and activity by pneuma. At its most basic level, pneuma generates cohesion and unifies the substance by holding it together. This state of unification and cohesion is referred to as hexis in Stoicism. Even placid-looking objects are abuzz with a kind of inner energy or tension, according to the philosophy of Stoicism. What are some examples of hexis, or basic cohesion and unification in nature? Materials like rocks and wood. When the body pneuma is structured with a higher level of tension or activity, it is termed as fusis, or a more organic characteristic. Materials possessing fusis grow, develop, and procreate. However, they are bereft of cognitive faculties. They do not possess the ability to think, rationalize, and imagine. The fusis is also believed to offer greater strength to the hexis. The Stoics firmly believed that every power on the scala natura classification system encompasses the lower powers. Plants, for example, possess hexis and fusis, but are devoid of a soul. Tier 3 of the hierarchical pneumatic gradation includes psyche, or the soul. The presence of psyche points out to perception and impulse. Non-logical beings, animals, possess all three, hexis, fusis, and psyche. Human beings, along with gods, are believed to have the highest degree of pneumatic tension and activity, called logos, or logic and reason. The reason, as a concept of Stoicism, was an aggregation of preconceptions, beliefs, and conceptions. It is mainly dominated by the use of ideas as expressed in a linguistic form or through language. Human thoughts, Stoicists believed, follow a proportional and structured nature defined by language, which may or may not be vocalized. The focus on language in ancient Stoicism was more related to an internal dialogue than external expressions. There is a tendency to confuse Stoicism's scala natura with Aristotle's soul hierarchy theory. Though they appear similar on the face of it, Stoicism takes to classifying both animate and inanimate substances, while Aristotle's theory is restricted to living organisms. Aristotle's school of thought also defines the very essence of a soul differently from Stoicism. The fundamental theory of Stoic philosophy has some insightful connotations. Stoic thinkers held that active materials and substances were capable of pervading the more passive materials, which is why the soul, a body by itself, was capable of permeating the biological body. According to the Stoics, the soul does not simply fill the body's interstitial spaces, but holds the same space as the bodily passive matter. Both the active and passive coexist mutually. It is similar to heat permeating via an iron road. They hold the same space. They do not fill gaps left by the other. Yet, both the entities are distinct. Stoicism refers to this as krasis, or absolute blending. According to Stoicism, total blending should contrast with fusion and particulate blending. Particulate mixture is a mixture where each element remains unaffected by the final mixture with only an alternation in distribution pattern. Fusion mixture happens when items are physically combined to create an altogether new substance, like mixing yeast and flour to make bread. In a total mixture, unlike fusion mixture, blended materials retain their individual characteristics and can be segregated. Stoicism and soul. We know thus far that the pneuma present in the soul has a defined structure that dominates its activities or capacities. Stoicism believes that the soul is comprised of 8 parts, which are different parts of the pneuma, namely, our 5 senses, procreation faculty, speech abilities, and a fundamental commanding center, also known as the hegemonicon. Every part of the soul is seen as originating from the central commanding faculty, or hegemonicon. There were several analogies offered by ancient Stoics to describe the complex concept of the human soul, and the idea that distinct powers grow from the hegemonicon in the center of the heart, and not out of the head. Much like Aristotle, the Stoics believed that a person's cognitive faculty nucleus is located in the chest and not in his head. Stoicism firmly believes in the heart as the foremost functioning part of a fetus, with the soul pneuma originating here and slowly spreading to the rest of the body. The powers gather more strength and momentum as they spread, and the fetus experiences growth and development. Higher faculties of speech, logic, perception, and procreation are mere extensions of pneuma that attains a more mature stage when a person approaches their adult years. The Stoics believed that higher cognitive faculties are exclusive to the hegemonicon, while Aristotle's philosophy attributes functions such as touch and vision to the respective sensory organs. Stoic school of philosophy holds that our sense organs flash what they take into the central faculty where all experiences are ultimately processed. Stoic logic and mind. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Epictetus. In Stoicism, the fundamental power of the central faculty is to create phatasisi, or presentation. Every psychological state is believed to be an extension or reaction to these presentations. Zeno talked about presentation as something that is deeply embedded in the central commanding faculty. During birth, our hegemonicon is akin to a blank paper that's set to take in all the writing. According to the founder of Stoicism, Zeno, phantasia is a term that originates from light, or phos. Much like light, our presentation manifests itself along with its fundamental clause. The Stoics differentiated these senses that originated firsthand from the sense organs to the ones stored in mind from previous sensory experiences. The Stoic principles of memory, imagination, and concepts are strongly entrenched in the philosophy of presentation. Stoicism versus Epicureanism. Stoicism and Epicureanism were 2 fundamental Hellenistic philosophical schools of thought, schools that came after Aristotle. Though their basic tenets differed, both the schools of philosophy identified the main objective of philosophy to convert the self into a wise sage. The attempt was to attain nothing short of the perfection of existence, or ideal state of being, virtually unattainable for us constantly erring creatures. Though ideas are almost impossible to achieve, both the schools of thought focused on the value of progressing towards these ideals and a higher perfection state. Seneca, a fervent Stoic, openly lavished praise on the Epicurean philosophy and highlighted the difference between Epicureanism and Stoicism. Epicureanism was a philosophy stressing on the significance of guiding one's desires. If we are able to get into the habit of desiring only that which is natural and fundamentally necessary for our existence as humans, we can bathe in pure happiness or understand how pleasurable it is merely to exist. The true Epicurean is the one whose fundamental needs have been met and is able to find almost a godly level of happiness in his existence. Stoics, on the other hand, expounded that there are several factors outside our circle of control. These could lead to several tragedies and make our existence tough. The things beyond our circle of influence can be anything from sickness to poverty to several other tragic circumstances dealt by fortune. We cannot do much except hope for the storm to pass and survive. Unlike Epicureans, Stoics emphasized that being alive means embracing troubles that can sprout up in our life for absolutely no fault of ours, which therefore means that the way to happiness doesn't simply mean renouncing the elements we desire. We also need the armor of courage, moral fortitude, and wisdom to live a fulfilled life. Bad things are inevitable, and chasing things whose attainment does not solve any purpose is pointless. A true Stoic, in their opinion, will tolerate a change in circumstances or a blow of misfortune with courage, understanding, balance, and inner strength and resolve, and will avoid acting on impulses or lower desires. Seneca's own explanation of the difference between the two schools of thought went on to state that while the Stoic felt his troubles and overcame them, the Epicurean does not feel his troubles. Though both Epicureanism and Stoicism shared the view that a man of wisdom is truly content within himself, their approach to dealing with adversities and life's challenges varied greatly. The Stoics were of the view that the universe is primarily rational, while for the Epicureans it was an atomic accident, but also deterministic. Stoicism believed in a single powerful fate that underlined the entire world, which evolved in a logical order. The Epicureans believed in atoms, while the Stoics held the view that inner matter or bodies and logic or reasoning structured the matter's movements and fate. Logic became the fundamental organizing principle. They viewed the study of logic as fundamental, as it dictated the basic form of the world or universe's evolution. It's like the Epicureans had a more biologist and chemistry approach to life, while the Stoics were the more theoretically driven physicists. Though both schools of thought viewed the study of philosophy as integral to freedom from pain and suffering, the approaches to achieving it were distinctly different. The ideas for achieving a fulfilled or happy life differed on both Epicureanism and Stoicism. Since the universe develops in a completely natural and linear manner, the ideal course would be to simply follow nature's dictates, according to Stoicism. This was the definition of what the Stoics referred to as virtue, or that which was completely in accordance with the universe. Both pain and pleasure influenced us, and as humans, we were logically inclined to be attracted or repulsed by these elements. However, the all-powerful, developing, natural, or universal logic was believed to override all pleasantness considerations. Thus, Stoicism's fundamental problem was gaining a sort of divine insight, or contemplating what the universal logic entailed in any given circumstance. This obviously needed painstaking consideration and a thorough understanding of any given situation, which led to the archetypical Stoic image of someone who is completely unaffected by impulse or emotions and determines his course of action on a greater rational approach. Stoicism and Cynicism. Stoics have cynicism as their basis. The founder of Stoic philosophy, Zeno of Citium, was a disciple of Crates, a known cynic. Zeno eventually concluded that human beings are not suited for asceticism. He therefore sought to soften the more harsh principles of cynicism to create Stoicism. Zeno was particularly in agreement with the principles of cynicism that we must not trust pleasure. The disagreement was about how to deal with this pleasure. According to Zeno, there's no need to denounce pleasure entirely. One can still enjoy the pleasant or pleasurable things in life without being imprisoned by them. Stoicism spoke extensively about taking measures to prevent being dominated by our quest for pleasure. The Cynics and the Stoics were far from antisocial as popular perception suggested. The Stoics were in fact very clear about the notion that we need a social company to stay happy and live a fulfilled life. However, they also believed that people were alone the source of disturbance in daily living and their sense of tranquility. Therefore, the Stoics came up with several strategies for preventing others from disturbing their serenity. A strategy for maintaining one's tranquility was to brace oneself in the face of insults that are directed your way. The Stoics propagated insult pacifism, or acting as if it didn't matter, almost like nothing at all had happened. Your coping mechanism should be zero response. Even if you feel the urge to respond, resort to self-deprecating humor. Chapter 2. Brief History of Stoicism. It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. Seneca, The Stoic Philosophy of Seneca, Essays and Letters. Stoicism was first introduced in Athens, Greece around 300 BC by Zeno of Citium. Zeno was a disciple of the Cynic Crates of the Thebes school of thought, and Stoicism was seen as a refinement or evolution of Cynicism. It diluted the somewhat harsh concepts of Cynicism with more moderate, practical, and real-world principles. In its early days, Stoicism was viewed as a back-to-earth movement that was increasingly critical of society's superstitions. Zeno was succeeded by his disciple Cleanthes of Assos, 330 to 230 BC, though his most popular student was Chrysippus of Soli, Cleanthes' disciple. He largely structured the principles of modern-day Stoicism, which was a result of the unification of world accounts, formal logic, materialistic physics, and ethics. Stoicism's primary focus has always been ethics, although later philosophers were keener on exploring its logical theories. Neo-Stoicism is an amalgamation movement merging the best of Stoicism and Christianity, conceptualized by Justus Lipsius, 1547 to 1606, a Belgian humanist. It gave more practical touches to a more theoretical concept. Neo-Stoicism spoke more about leading a good life and eliminating suffering by not yielding to basic emotions and temptations such as greed, fear and happiness, and sorrow. It asks an individual to surrender to God or a higher force. Stoicism is a more eudaimonic philosophy, which translates as being inspired by predecessors and modern thinkers, in addition to engaging in a critical discussion about the different schools of philosophy. This includes the Socratic school of thought, Platonism, Aristotelianism, Cynicism, Epicureanism, and more. Eudaimonia is a term that loosely translates into making life worthy of living or gaining happiness in a broader sense. The Greco-Romans were essentially defined by exceptionally high moral values. Stoicism, therefore, became inextricably woven with virtue ethics similar to Aristotle's school of philosophy. Greek Stoic roots. The Greek Stoa era covers the initial two phases, from the time it was founded by Zeno to the second phase of shifting its primary base from Greece to Rome during the era of Poseidonus, who befriended Cicero, a non-Stoic, one of the greatest sources for indirect Stoicism in its early stages. Stoicism didn't just take birth, but thrived in Greece, with a majority of its followers from the eastern Mediterranean region. Zeno came from Citium, now Cyprus, Cleanthes from modern-day West Turkey, then Assos, and Chrysippus from modern-day South Turkey. This pattern merely reflected the prevailing cultural dynamics of the era, which were largely influenced by Alexander's conquests. It shaped and structured the ethos of Stoicism. Since the outset, Stoicism earned the label of a Socratic concept, which the Stoics weren't very unhappy with. Zeno was hugely influenced by Cynicism, which eventually molded the Stoic school of thought. Among his many teachers was Stilpo from the Megarian school, established by Euclid Megaria, a disciple of Socrates. Thus, one of the great Socrates' disciples was Zeno's teacher, which explains the Socratic leanings of Stoicism. Zeno founded the tripartite Stoic philosophy consisting of physics, logic, and ethics. The ethics aspect fundamentally comprised a less extreme version of Cynicism. The physics element was deeply inspired by Plato's Timaeus, cosmic principles of cause and effects, and active and passive principles of materials. And finally, logic comprised both formal logic and knowledge theory. The Stoic philosophers that came after Zeno often conflicted on a number of ideas, including interpreting Zeno's principles differently. One such instance is the disagreement between Chrysippus and Cleanthes about Stoicism's virtue unity. Zeno believed every virtue to be a type of wisdom, which Cleanthes deduced in a linear sense that all virtues are a single wisdom. Chrysippus comprehended this in a pluralistic manner, which is each virtue as a form of wisdom and not all virtues being a single wisdom. The ancient Stoic followers were decidedly anti-evidence toward Zeno's teachings. For instance, Chrysippus clearly defended the notion of the heart being the center of intelligence. This went totally against empirical evidence that awarded the cognitive seat to the brain. The Stoics attracted plenty of criticism during the Hellenistic period due to their inability to deny ideas even in the face of glaring criticism, though eventually they did go on to update their principles with emerging studies. Despite what was termed a glaring fallacy, Chrysippus remained one of the most prominent Stoic thinkers, credited for restructuring the Stoic school of thought. During the next 60 years after Chrysippus, there were a couple of Stoa's heads, including Zeno of Tarsus, now southern central Turkey, and Diogenes of Babylon. The next significant event related to Stoicism came only in 155 BCE. The leaders of three distinct schools, Stoics, Academics, and Peripatetics, were commissioned on a diplomatic mission to Rome. Needless to say, the Greek philosophers made a favorable impression on the Romans with a series of performances. The byproduct of this eventually became the worrisome trend of Roman elite clashing with philosophers that dominated the post-Republican era, thus leading the way for Rome taking over from Athens as the new breeding ground of philosophers, in addition to other emerging learning hubs like Alexandria in Egypt. Starting with Antipater of Tarsus, the Stoics consistently restructured their equation with the school of thought, especially the relevance of Timaeus for cosmology. Poseidonus was hugely drawn to the fact that Plato's protagonist in the teachings was a Pythagorean, a disciple that invariably managed to connect himself to Stoicism. Roman Stoicism. The turning point for the introduction of philosophy in Rome probably happened with the landmark visit by Greek philosophers around 155 BCE. This crucial event introduced important philosophical concepts to the Roman masses. However, the political events that tailed it during 88 to 86 BCE altered the course of not the Western philosophical concepts in general, but also Stoicism in particular. Philosophers belonging to the Peripatetic Athenian and Epicurean Aristean shockingly were helming the power at Athens. They made a terrible blunder of showing allegiance to Mithridates against Roman forces. Ultimately, Athens and kind Pontus were defeated, spelling doom for Greece. The events of the iconic 88 to 86 BCE upheaval shifted the center of Stoicism from its birthplace, Greece, to Rome. In Tarsus, it was a Stoic who was chosen by Emperor Augustus to rule the region. Stoicism gained prominence in Rome during the era of change of power from the Republic to the Empire. Cato the Younger became a poster boy for Stoics owing to his staunch philosophical opposition toward Julius Caesar. There were two main Stoic philosophers during this era, Athenodorus of Tarsus and Arrius Didymus. This was followed by the highly controversial Seneca. Athenodorus and Arrius were confidential counselors to Emperor Augustus, with Arrius penning a lengthy letter to Livia, Augustus's wife, about her son's demise. Seneca later termed this as an exemplary work in emotional therapy. Seneca himself went on to gain popularity for his contribution to the field of emotional therapy. During the imperial period, there was a resolute transition from the predominantly theoretical principles of Stoicism to more practical ethics. The most prominent Stoic figures of the era were Musonius Rufus and Epictetus, or politically driven leaders such as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. Thus, the era became a significant period of contrast between the erstwhile theoretical concepts of Stoicism with its newly emerging practical approach. What remains probably one of the most significant developments in the field of Stoic philosophy during the Roman imperial era is the impact of its growth, which ultimately led to the formation of two factions: Neo-Stoicism during the Renaissance and the currently followed modern contemporary Stoic movement. The Stoics were at the receiving side of endless persecutions from threatened royalty, which leads to a series of murders and exiles. This was more marked during the rule of Vespasian and Domitian. Nero went on to order Seneca to commit suicide, while Epictetus was condemned to a life of exile in Greece. The last significant classical Stoic writing originated from the journal of Marcus Aurelius, who passed away in 180 A.D. The living tradition for Stoicism ended with the death of Aurelius and the ban on all philosophy schools by Christian Emperor Justinian I in 529 A.D., since he attributed their origins to pagan links. Christianity and Stoicism. When Christianity was anointed as the official Roman religion, along with several other schools of thought, Stoicism was hit too. The concept, however, survived through several historical eras. Much of modern existentialism and neo-Orthodox Protestant schools of thought have Stoic leanings. The concept also experienced soaring popularity in contemporary times as a combined discipline with other modern physiological practices such as cognitive behavioral therapy. Many Stoic principles overlap with contemporary philosophical concepts such as Buddhism. Chapter 3: Stoicism Ethics. It is not the man who has too little that is poor, but the one who hankers after more. Seneca, Letters from a Stoic. While the erstwhile Stoics, like founder Zeno, followed by Cleanthes and Chrysippus, placed greater emphasis on a theoretical approach to Stoicism, it evolved gradually according to the studies, theories, and political and historical events over a period of time to define its current modernist streak. The Stoics regard humans as possessing natural propensities, instincts, as we would refer to them today, which is capable of being refined with age. According to Stoicism ethics, the propensities are related directly to our four primary virtues like courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance. The Stoics didn't restrict the ethical aspects of Stoicism to these four primary virtues alone. Each of the cardinal virtues was broken down into several sub-virtues, such as courage being branched out to include perseverance, generosity, self-confidence, kindness, and more. They weren't considered exclusive, but all-encompassing. The fundamental virtues of Stoicism ethics originate from the Socrates school of thought and offer a specific unifying manner of defining ethics. For instance, Justice can be wisdom with a social living application, or courage can be endurance lending wisdom, or temperance can be practical wisdom related to wielding choices. Stoic behavior is typically defined by holding oneself away from passion, remaining unaffected by emotions such as joy and sorrow, and completely submitting to the law of nature. Subscribing to the Stoic way of life means remaining calm, unaffected, and devoid of any emotion. When you're a Stoic, you avoid showing what you're feeling or come to embrace everything that is happening. The word Stoic in noun form literally means a person who isn't very emotionally affected. Stoic as an adjective describes any individual or action that is blank or emotionless. Objectivity and self-discipline. You shouldn't give circumstances the power to rouse anger, for they don't care at all. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 738. The Stoics were of the opinion that a clear, objective, and disciplined individual understands the reason for the natural universe in everything. According to their school of thought, misery and sorrow are the direct consequence of a person's ignorance. Lack of compassion originates from an individual's lack of awareness about their reason or place in the universe. The solution to put an end to this misery can be practiced through Stoicism through the careful scrutiny of one's own behavior, thoughts, and decisions. It helps to examine where the person has strayed from the universal cause of nature. One of the most popular Stoic maxims is, live according to nature, within the sense of the universe's laws and a person's fundamental nature or reason. In several aspects, Stoicism bears a striking similarity to the ethical concepts of Gautama Buddha and Buddhism, which has its roots firmly entrenched in the Four Noble Truths of life, namely, number 1, no life is free of suffering. Number 2, desire is the basis of all suffering. Number 3, happiness can be attained when we are free of desires and passions. And number 4, self-discipline is the path to liberation from suffering. Virtue and reason. One of the most important aspects of Stoicism is enhancing a person's overall moral and ethical well-being by possessing a strong will that is completely in sync with nature, and by consistently applying the 4 cardinal virtues as explained by Plato's school of thought. According to the Stoics, existing according to a sense of reason and virtue is to exist with a sense of harmony with the universe's divine order. It recognizes the fundamental value and common reason of individuals. Stoicism propounded principles of egalitarianism and encouraged equality among all orders of society, such as master and slave, on the cornerstone that each individual is but a child of God, partly resonating Socrates' ideas about being neither a Greek nor Athenian, but a citizen of the universe or world. Outer differences, such as rank, societal status, and wealth, meant little within social relationships. According to Stoicism, to be virtuous, one doesn't have to develop any special qualities apart from cognitive or rational abilities. Unlike Aristotle and Plato, Stoics believe that our soul doesn't possess a non-rational section. Although there is recognition that negative passions such as fear, jealousy, and anger exist, these are merely looked upon by Stoics as misjudgments about good and bad. The wise is believed to be the person who doesn't have mistaken judgments about right and wrong, and thus he is said to be devoid of passions. Hence, a Stoic has no emotion even if he becomes a victim of misfortune. As opposed to Aristotle and Plato's school of thought, Stoicism didn't believe that virtue was the domain of any particular community. Stoics believed that social relationships are a subject of indifference, though the school of thought is not opposed to it. They accept that a community opposes conditions such as enmity, war, injustice, and hostility. However, they don't believe that these relationships are vital from the perspective of living a happier life, which is, they aren't necessary or central to our happiness. If we happen to lose these, it isn't a big loss per se, or a loss of real good, according to Stoic philosophy. The sole community that mattered to the Stoics was the cosmic world. In their view, when people achieve the truest form of rationality, they align themselves with the divine rational order of the universe. This clearly points to the idea that mankind is ruled by a single law, and everyone belongs to a single community. As rational creatures, we identify that we have reason in common with other rational beings. This is the biggest connection of all. According to Stoicism, we have every reason or purpose to extend our compassion beyond our family, social circle, and the community of fellow beings around the world at large, which is the ultimate community, in their opinion. The Stoics became symbolic of a life that strives as much for the happiness and well-beings of others as oneself, without focusing on material rewards or popular notions of success. Since the Stoic definition of virtue was free from a specific social structure, religious, or political framework, it enjoyed a universal appeal. Determinism. Stoicism is partly determinism in the sense that it informs us that while we will do what the world dictates us to, we should also avoid complying with the law blindly. We must have it in us to overcome our obedience and follow the law determinedly and consciously as a rational creature. The 1st century A.D. Roman philosopher and famous Stoic thinker Seneca the Younger remains one of the leading proponents of Stoicism up to today. He wrote an entire book devoted to the subject of anger, which he viewed as a more philosophical issue and likened to being tackled by philosophical argument rather than a mere outwardly outburst that is a result of our lack of control. Seneca the Younger believed that anger stems from holding excessively optimistic visions of the world, paving the way for unrealistic expectations, and called for adopting a greater pessimistic world. So one is prepared mentally for every eventuality and isn't much affected by it when it actually happens, thus preventing angry outbursts. One of the most scathing attacks on Stoicism came from its tenet of determinism. Critics were of the opinion that if everything is predetermined in the way proposed by Stoics, why is there a need to try anything at all? Things will happen as they are determined to happen, which means any effort to make things happen from our side will be futile. Let's take an everyday example to make things more digestible. Say you see a beautiful gown on an online fashion store and want to buy it for an upcoming theme office party. You are either fated to receive the gown or not fated to receive it. If it's your fate, you will get it irrespective of your actions. You really don't need to do anything or take any action in that direction. Fate will somehow create a series of events for you to receive your gown in any way. Perhaps the courier person will get someone's address wrong and the same gown ordered by someone else will come to you. Now, if it's not your fate to receive that dress, you'll not receive it, despite placing the order. The store may run out of stock, or the warehouse may catch fire, or the store may close overnight. So in the truest sense of fate, your actions will bear no impact on the final result if it's destined to pan out in a certain manner. So you might as well not do anything on your part. The archetypical Stoic response will be that you are buying the gown from the online store and the delivery is both co-fated. This simply means if you are destined to receive the gown for your office party, you are also destined to buy it by clicking the purchase option. According to the Stoic school of thought, causations are all interlinked and not isolated from each other. Thus, a series of events that form a chain are fated to happen, and your own choices and actions are an integral part of that causation chain. Say you are looking for the perfect partner. If it's your fate to date someone in the next few days, general belief says you will find him or her without any action on your part. And, similarly, if you aren't destined to date someone, you aren't going to meet them, irrespective of whatever you do on your part. So, the fate school may goad you into complete inaction, that is, irrespective of your actions towards fulfilling this goal. You will or will not meet someone purely based on your destiny. However, Stoicism sees every action of yours as a part of a destiny chain to receive or attract that relationship into your life. Every act in the direction of meeting your partner, registering on a dating site, joining a dating club, traveling, making new friends on social media, etc., is not viewed in isolation of that destiny. It is, in fact, integral to the destiny of meeting your partner. It is what led to you finding your mate. So, in a sense, it contributed to your destiny. Though the above examples may come across as innately simplistic, it gives a good idea about how the principle of determinism or accepting one's destiny can be misconstrued to goad people into passivity. Stoicism and impulse. Today, I escaped anxiety. Or no, I discarded it because it was within me in my own perceptions, not outside. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Impulse, according to Stoic philosophy, is the reaction of our soul towards a subject. Though it is a subject agreement of logic in rational creatures, it exists in all moving forms of life from birth. The Stoics assert that our original impulse held within the soul is exactly what is appropriate for us when it comes to self-preservation. According to the Stoics, our original impulses alone are the path to preserving our peace and well-being, unlike the Epicureans. Stoicism believes that the entire universe is similar, or one force, and is headed by a completely rational entity, God. Therefore, every part of the whole is naturally made up of what is right or appropriate for it, just as our body parts perform functions according to what is suitable for the overall body to work smoothly. Just like our individual body parts seek to preserve themselves and the entire body, the world protects its natural constituents and itself. The Stoic school of thought believes that as we grow, we keep discovering new experiences and things and beliefs according to our basic nature. We are naturally attracted to things that feel appropriate for our nature. When we mature, we discover more than food, drink, and warmth, which were the only essentials as babies. We aren't just attracted to what is suitable for us, but also what is like us. It is a sort of revelation that others are appropriate for us as long as they are rational beings. Since the Stoics feel a sense of oneness with the morality of knowledge and ascribe an idea of perfection to a creature's rational nature, whatever is authentically good is believed to be appropriate. If an individual's cognitive and moral growth is appropriate, we go a notch above to stages where food, drink, and warmth are taken care of, and the focus is on valuing social relationships and morals. Ideally, it dawns upon us that the value possessed by the moral is distinctly diverse from the order of elements we were naturally drawn to earlier. We later come to understand that the only true good is a virtue. Epicurus had proposed a theory for recognizing the real natural human value. According to him, a newborn baby, unaffected as it is by worldly experiences, much like irrational animals, isn't fed by society's norms. The baby's revealing actions tell us louder than several words put together that its only objective is acquiring pleasure and preventing pain. Stoics adopt an almost similar approach as a starting point, but later use oikeiosis, translated familiarization or affiliation, to debunk the Epicurean thought. They go on to assert that the process of making a thing one's own is nothing but a creature's natural impulse to something that it identifies with or feels a sense of belonging with. The initial oikiosis, according to Stoics, is toward oneself, with self-preservation being a dominant objective. It doesn't chase pleasure. Rather, the natural instinct is to court pain for preserving and developing one's inherent constitution, such as witnessing a toddler repetitively learning to walk, despite falling several times. As we grow, the human oikiosis goes beyond its capacity. We learn to think and care about other beings in the same manner in which we have learned to care for ourselves. The oikiosis now encompasses more people, albeit in a more diluted form. Indifference. One of the most dominant doctrines of Stoicism is that virtue itself is good and vice is bad. In Stoic ethics, everything that is conventionally given a positive or negative attribute is viewed as indifferent. It is almost similar to the Buddhist Zen approach, which seeks to remain unaffected or indifferent to everything. Thus, in Stoicism, poverty, blindness, death, wealth, everything becomes a basis for indifference. Good is defined in a strictly moral sense by Stoics. The theory, of course, originated from Socrates' teachings. In several Platonic conversations, he argued that what was classified as good in Socratic work are in fact a middle way between the positive and negative. If utilized well, they become positive. If used foolishly, bad. This good, as defined by the Socratic school of thought, became indifferent in Stoicism. The examples typified by the two schools of thought almost overlap, though they've been given different terms. Zeno believed that staying healthy does not automatically stimulate happiness in a being, though it is a natural instinct to be healthy and prevent illness. Being happy is not chasing pleasure, but being in tune with nature by not trying to choke our natural instincts. The right way to lead our life is by bowing down to the dictates of nature, thus succumbing to family values, high status, and affluence along with other inherent desiderata. We learn to alter the formula as and when we progress in life. Stoicism believes that if it corresponds with nature's plan for you to be poor or sick or experience death, it may be in exceptional circumstances the ideal way for you to comply with nature. If you develop an understanding of why this is natural for you, there will be a greater tendency to embrace it rather than battle it. Sensory experiences. Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought, for the human spirit is colored by such impressions. Marcus Aurelius. Stoic logic emphasizes that conviction of knowledge can be achieved through logic or reason. It can also be asserted by verifying the certainty with the help of our peers or the collective knowledge and judgment of mankind at large. Our sensory organs are perpetually receiving experiences in the form of sensations and pulsations, which transfer from the senses right into our mind. Thus, an impression or imprint is left on the mind. The human mind is able to accept or reject the impressions received and differentiate between perceived reality of the true and false. This concept of Stoic philosophy is directly opposed to Plato's idealism, which describes the mind as the single source of knowledge, which sources from the senses for all errors, hallucinations, and illusions. Chapter 4: Stoicism, Philosophy, and Self-Development. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. Marcus Aurelius. If you're a self-help geek, chances are you have a pile of physical and e-books waiting to be devoured as the next quick fix to all ails. how to improve your self-confidence in the next 7 days, how to lose 10 pounds in the next 20 days, the only hacks you'll ever need for getting out of the procrastinator mindset, etc., are some examples of how the quick fix mentality is peddled to unsuspecting and desperate solution seekers. Now that you have a fairly refined understanding of Stoicism, you'd realize that in comparison to life hacks or self-development philosophies and strategies, Stoicism doesn't focus on enhancing cherry-picked aspects of your life. Rather, it talks about enhancing your entire life by changing the way you approach it. Giving a practical twist to the theoretical and philosophical aspects of Stoicism, you first seek to understand what is worth having in life. Later, you move on to develop a strategy for achieving it. Tranquility, as defined by Stoicism, isn't the absence of emotions. Rather, it is complete abstinence from negative or potentially destructive elements. Contrary to popular notions about Stoicism, there's nothing against the pursuit of joy. Zen Buddhism also talks about calmness, balance, and tranquility, much like Stoicism. Both the philosophies lay emphasis on peace as the most important thing worth having. The approach for accomplishing tranquility is different for all disciplines, but the end goal, more or less, stays the same. Negative visualization. The Stoic approach for accomplishing tranquility is a bit different from the other approaches. For instance, Stoicism recommends practicing negative visualization. It talks about the importance of letting ourselves imagine the worst, thus preparing for it or conditioning our mind to remain unaffected or stoic should it actually occur. In our minds, we visualize the worst and take our subconscious through any eventuality. This approach allows us to experience lesser negative emotions or maintain a more objective demeanor in the face of suffering or adversity. While the Zen Buddhist approach recommends zazen, or completely emptying our minds from all thoughts to help create room for insight for gaining freedom from desire, Stoicism talks about flashing thoughts about how life could be way worse than it is. Stoicism isn't about controlling things in the sense it can have its share of criticism without being a reactive philosophy. It is more about dealing with things that are beyond one's control. A Stoic simply copes with the things that he has zero control over with the help of negative visualization. Stoicism places a lot of emphasis on imagining the worst. There are several exercises like negative visualization that encourage one to contemplate negative things that have the possibility of occurring. So, a person thinks how much worse life could be if he were to lose his family or group of friends, or how bad things would be if he didn't have a home to live in. Contemplation is what the Stoics call for, not fear or worry. The idea is to simply contemplate unfortunate circumstances, not dread or worry about them. Stoics frequently contemplate circumstances of their own death without actually fearing it or worrying about it. Worrying or fearing the unfortunate is viewed as an act that doesn't serve any purpose. One of the most path-breaking Stoic discoveries was the theory that imagining the bad things that are likely to happen to us only makes us appreciate the good we are blessed with. With this realization, your thought process is completely transformed. You will simply be happy to be living. You will be delighted at the prospect of being alive and enjoying the gifts you have. On the contrary, worrying about bad circumstances in the future can only invite greater misery into your life. Psychological research has revealed that people often find it simpler to practice negative visualization because we are largely wired to imagine the worst. This leads to a greater feeling of optimism and is not completely defeatist, much as proponents of pop psychology would have us believe. Michigan State University psychologist Jason Moser studied 71 women to understand whether they were predominantly negative or positive thinking. The subjects were exposed to graphic images such as a woman's throat about to be slit with a knife. The brain activity was continuously monitored. Later, the same women were asked to visualize a positive outcome for the given scenario. For example, the woman fights the assailant and escapes. According to Mazur, their brains actually showed a startlingly paradoxical effect when asked to imagine a more positive outcome. The negative emotions only increased compared to when they were visualizing the worst. This led to the conclusion that we have a tough time giving a more positive spin to challenging situations even when we are directed to imagine positive thoughts. Thus, negative visualization helps us by imagining the worst and drives us into realizing that we are blessed to lead the life we do. Philosophy drives self-help goals. What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for some goal worthy of him. Viktor Frankl. Philosophy provides a base or backbone for accomplishing your goals. With the lack of a philosophical foundation, people simply flip from one shining, best-selling self-help concept to another, with little results to boast of. We try to achieve individual goals every week only to be disappointed, without trying to change our basic, holistic approach towards life. Think of yourself as the captain of a ship. Can you randomly keep changing the course of the vessel every few minutes and yet expect to reach your destination? You will most likely lose sight and lose your way in the ocean's vastness and spend your entire life in water while searching for land. This metaphor explains how we flake from one quick-fix approach to another for enhancing our life while constantly seeking different methods without subscribing to a single philosophy. People who lack a definitive philosophy don't make much headway when it comes to enhancing their lives. The metaphorical fate of a person lacking philosophy is that they are forever in the sea, engaged in their quest for finding the land through misplaced means. Whatever age, situation, or juncture at life you are, it's never too late to subscribe to a philosophy of living that best resonates with your values and goals. The earlier you subscribe to the philosophy, the greater you can benefit from it. Imagine being on the verge of dying and discovering a great new approach to living. Catastrophically tragic? You bet. It's the era of popular self-help blogs, life hacks, and self-development videos. Desperate content consumers are forever searching for new hacks that make them appear smarter and better than others. There isn't a sense of cohesiveness or a coherent ideology for living. Yes, it may take greater effort to identify and stick to a single philosophical approach, but the results may turn out to be more effective than you believe. Adopting a life philosophy requires several adjustments in everyday living. However, it may be more than worth it when you consider your overall life quality. Subscribing to a clear, well-defined, and strong philosophy allows you to lead a happier and more meaningful life. Stoicism and Zen Buddhism. You shouldn't give circumstances the power to rouse anger, for they don't care at all. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 738. Plenty of millennials are turning to Zen Buddhism as a means of coping with life and self-development. Stoicism has plenty in common with Zen Buddhism. The underlying concept of both the schools of thought is contemplating impermanence. Both Zen Buddhism and Stoicism expound on the philosophy that everything in life is temporary, and that we should remain largely unaffected by the constant impermanence in situations or circumstances. Both advocated developing a more detached and contemplative mindset that is not enslaved by desires or circumstances. However, the only primary difference between the two is that while Zen Buddhism talks about renunciation of desires or possessions, Stoicism doesn't ask for freedom from desires or possessions or term desires as the root cause of all evil. It only talks about not being enslaved by overpowering desires. This simply means even if there is a change in circumstances or situations, you should be able to remain largely unaffected by it. Though you can chase social relationships, material possessions, and societal rank, one must not be at the mercy of these elements. Zen Buddhism is more about austerity and practicing total freedom from passions and desires that are believed to override our thoughts, thus leading us to the path of evil. Both Stoicism and Buddhism speak about bringing down the concept of self. Both the philosophies expound on freedom from suffering by living on a more mindful basis. From the Buddhist perspective, what starts as a sensation grows into a full-blown desire that leads to greater suffering. In Stoicism, the link of suffering between value judgments and our assent or belief in those judgments is cut. This simply means we rise only to the ideal value judgments. Stoicism propagates reasoning as the primary identity seat, or the true virtue and goodness path. Buddhism, on the other hand, propagates the idea of absorption through meditation and awareness as the main viewpoint from which identity originates and suffering ends. Thus, while the former is more rational and intellectual, the latter is perceptual. Stoicism can be used as a philosophy for everyday living. It can be integrated into our normal life patterns, where we perform our responsibilities and undertake worldly affairs. Au contraire, Buddhism has a more renunciation-based approach that urges people to give up attachment to desires and material possessions in exchange for living in a monastery for extended periods and for performing standard Buddhism practices. Even domesticated folks practicing Buddhism within the circle of everyday life are known to reserve some time for retreating into solitude for following the common Buddhism practices. Stoicism and character building. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Marcus Aurelius. Zeno defined moral character as an endless source of life and behavior, from where all our actions originate. Stoicism has two fundamental methods for describing virtue or virtuous, theory and practical. According to Stoics, what is truly virtuous and what isn't of virtue is fairly obvious. Seneca's Letter 71 quotes, "To infer the nature of this supreme good, one does not need many words or any roundabout discussion. It should be pointed out with the forefinger, so to speak, and not be dissipated into many parts." A person's ability to recognize virtue is similar to his ability to identify certain pieces of sounds as being music. Although there will be theoretical concepts, you can't rely on these as propelling someone to be virtuous or build their character. They simply have to see it. You aren't going to witness much success simply convincing someone to learn how to play a musical instrument because of a lengthy neurological theory about why people take to music, or offer a full-blown definition about musical concepts such as beats, rhythms, etc. The only true way is to play some pieces of music and let people experience it. What a pleasant piece of music. Saw that? The Stoic argument related to virtue is very similar to the music analogy. When attempting to convince others to lead a more virtuous life, the Stoics believe in describing the acts of virtue. The Stoic philosophy classifies acts as primitive and subordinate, with the primitive being the fundamental universal virtues and the subordinate ones being those contained within the primitive ones. The primitive virtues are prudence, courage, temperance, and justice, while some subordinate virtues are magnanimity, wisdom, the presence of mind, continence, and tolerance. Not just virtues. Vices are primary and subordinate too. For example, cowardice, injustice, intemperance, and folly are recognized as fundamental vices, whereas slowness and incontinence are identified as subordinate vices. Let's take an example to see how Stoicism prepares us to tackle everyday challenges by building character. Take, for instance, a pet you loved dearly passed away. You felt devastated. Sadness can never be a good feeling. We have no control over what happens to us, but we can completely control how we feel about it or rationalize it. There are two choices, really. You wallow in pity about a situation over which you had little control, or think about the pet in a different way with happier memories, which induces a happier, positive feeling. There are some forces of nature that led to the sad eventually that you're confronted with. However, these very forces of nature also create some wonderful things for your everyday. They are responsible for the beautiful scenery outside your house and many other wonderful things that you take for granted. Stoicism says that the entire universe is a single entity. We love and accept our siblings or partners despite their annoying habits as a whole, with the good and bad. Similarly, the universe can be annoying at times. However, you should love and accept it in all its components, even though they may not always be pleasant or make you feel sad up front. So, even though initially you'll be prone to feeling sad after the death of your pet, you can bring about a shift in your thoughts by accepting that the universe has granted you several happy memories with your pet, which you can cherish forever. When you accept that universe with its good and bad and choose to focus on the happy memories granted to you by the universe, you bring yourself into an innately happy or unaffected state of mind. Happiness and sadness are both a part of us. You are completely responsible for all of your emotional experiences. At first, you will succumb to feeling bad when you hear sad news. However, simply question yourself about what is the need to feel sad. The pet is gone, but does that have anything to do with who you are or the real, true you? There were several moments in life when you felt devastated, like when children laughed at you for stammering in school, or when you didn't have money to buy yourself a square meal. However, did any of those moments truly define your character? Did they build the real you? Why should you be affected by them then? Look at the majority of happy, creative, and successful folks. Can you identify their most underlying traits? Is it most likely one of these: understanding, persistence, grit, character, expertise, and passion? However, there is an inner system that guides their thoughts and actions which isn't very conspicuous. What do they do in the face of life's setbacks? How do they cope with challenges and failures? How do they rationalize the not-so-pleasant? This is exactly what their philosophy is all about. Philosophy, and not self-help fixes, gives us a clear direction on how to lead a more fulfilling life and become better people. It also guides us in combating life's trials. Certain schools of philosophy are more theoretical in their approach and involve greater abstract thoughts that may or may not be suitable for everyday living, while others can be seamlessly woven into your life as a better way of living. Stoicism largely comes to the latter category. It is easy for everyone, from entrepreneurs to artists, to incorporate the philosophy of Stoic living into their life by focusing on adopting ways to lead a more rewarding life and become better individuals. The objective of Stoicism is to accomplish inner tranquility by rising above adversity, employing self-control, and being in control of one's impulses. These practices are believed to help us live within our true nature. It is vital to understand the challenges that we encounter rather than attempting to escape from them, according to the Stoic philosophy. Instead of getting rid of these obstacles, we should aim to convert them into the fuel that fans our fire even more. One of the harshest truths about philosophy and self-development is that most people today view the former as a pointless exercise exclusively meant for philosophers in their inaccessible ivory towers. Stoic philosopher Gaius Musonius Rufus has been often referred to as the Roman Socrates. He was famous for his integrity, truthfulness, and loyalty, in addition to being the teacher of Epictetus. He was viewed as a sort of radical for proposing that children should receive philosophical education from an early age to help mold their personalities, develop character, and help them overcome life's most pressing challenges. Chapter 5. Debunking Stoicism Myths. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Marcus Aurelius. To truly understand what philosophy is, you also have to understand what it's not. There is a huge tendency, especially in the current era of information overload, digitally sourced knowledge, and conflicting sources of information about the true principles or objective of an erstwhile philosophy. Stoicism isn't without its share of criticism and misinterpretation. It has earned a somewhat unflattering reputation as Stoics being emotionless and unaffected beings, almost wooden and grim, taking everything that's thrown their way silently. This can be a mistaken notion about the Stoic school of thought. It isn't really emotions that Stoics are against. It was more overpowering and destructive emotions, jealousy, rage, and fear, bordering on the negative that they were opposed to. Positive emotions were rarely questioned, and yet a joyful Stoic is believed by some to be a sort of oxymoron. The early works of Stoics list them as happy and well-adjusted individuals who were cheerful and savored delightful experiences to the fullest. They led normal lives with family and friends for support. Another startling and equally significant misconception of Stoicism is that it is a religion. The Stoics have consistently made references to a powerful universal force or God. However, Stoicism was never a religion or religious doctrine. If anything, it came closest to being a philosophical concept that highlighted the presence of submitting to nature or God's will. As such, it spoke about natural world order and placed the Almighty at the center of this order. While afterlife forms a huge basis of religion, Stoic philosophy was more concerned about living a good life. It offered a philosophical basis for life rather than expounding on the concepts of afterlife like religion. Stoicism informs us that there are some things which are most worthy of having in our life and equips us with a technique for gaining these things. The most important thing worth having in life is peace, contentment, or serenity, and the absence of destructive emotions alone can help us achieve this state of calmness or balance. Unlike quick self-help fixes that promise to tackle all the banes of our life, Stoicism hands us multiple physiological strategies for bringing our life into a state of tranquility. Stoicism isn't a religion in its truest sense, though its teachings are in sync with several religions. Its principles are compatible with Christianity, the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr, and Buddhism. Stoicism resonates with Epictetus's teachings that many things are beyond our control and that if we were rational beings, we would stop dwelling upon things that aren't in our control and focus on those that are within our circle of control. Again, Stoicism isn't a cult. You don't have to renounce everything to embrace Stoicism or go up in the mountains to practice it under an aging guru. There's no need to chuck your job, detach yourself from world pursuits, or dress conservatively. It merely calls for re-evaluating the manner in which you live or implement the actionable Stoic strategies to live a more fulfilling or content life. Stoicism advocates repressing one's emotions. The Greek Pathos loosely translates as pain or sorrow in English. However, the Greek term does refer to the all-encompassing emotion, at least when viewed in the backdrop of Stoicism. The Stoics either approved of emotion or proposed indifference to it. When it comes to pathos, they didn't encourage repression. However, they focused largely on preventing and treating the unpleasantness. Passions are in effect emotions reinforced by beliefs of things outside our control, which can be good or bad. Feelings, though, are perceptions that are within us and not elements that can be consciously controlled or avoided. A true Stoic avoids being controlled by perceptions into false notions of what's good or bad. This distinction is akin to viewing an optical illusion, where feeling and seeing the illusion are in correspondence. Passion, on the other hand, actually believes the illusion to be real. The distinction between passions and feeling has been an area for debate in Stoicism. While some people regard passions as those emotional issues that need help, such as anger management or depression, others view emotions as passions that are more feelings-oriented than being restricted to emotions that are a direct result of our reactions to, say, elements like music or fictional television shows or a novel. Unfortunately, many elements of classical Stoicism are lost in translation, owing to a faulty match between technical terms of the Stoic philosophy or terms that have been assigned different contextual meanings within the philosophy with contemporary English. For instance, in the above example itself, pathos meant emotions for some, feelings for others, and passion or suffering for still others. Classic old-school Stoics disagree with the more contemporary hydraulic approach to negative emotions. According to the hydraulic model, one releases one's emotions by creating an alternate way to express these potentially destructive feelings. For instance, if you are angry, you may punch the wall or shout into the air in a place no one can hear you. This acts as a mechanism for you to vent out negative emotions. However, in Stoicism, an individual is urged to refrain from making any conscious or voluntary decision or action that can be seen as acting on one's emotions or impulses. The Stoics are of the opinion that these actions only cause one's passions to gain strength. Repressing passions without tackling the underlying cause is similar to concealing symptoms of an illness without actually addressing the ailment from its roots. Ultimately, the illness spreads throughout the body to an extent where the symptoms become difficult to ignore. Instead of overlooking the underlying cause, we run after the symptoms. If there is a psychological issue that you're looking to eliminate, it shouldn't be approached by using a quick fix. Employ a range of psychological exercises to identify the root cause of the issue and then seek to tackle it from its roots rather than airbrushing symptoms to find temporary relief. This is where Stoicism differs from contemporary pop psychology self-help fixes. Stoicism encourages acceptance of fate. This is another popular misconception of the Stoic philosophy. The Stoics spoke about acceptance of external situations. In this context, the acceptance didn't necessarily imply resigning to one's fate, but only with accepting one's emotional reaction. It doesn't suggest that one's actions remain passive. At its most fundamental level, Stoicism was about being virtuous. It was related to displaying character excellence. These elements are all supposed to be within our control. We can determine whether we want to be a virtuous person by means of our actions. However, there are certain things that are beyond our control. Stoicism calls for the acceptance of elements that aren't in our control. There are several things that befall us from causes outside our circle of influence, which Stoicism advocates accepting. This shouldn't be confused with as simplistic a notion as accepting one's fate. Stoicism advocates pursuing pleasure. Another popular Stoicism misconception is that the philosophy is all about chasing pleasure as the ultimate goal. Enjoying the pleasures of everyday life was not considered the fundamental goal, though Stoicism was more relaxed compared to other philosophies like Cynicism or Buddhism about going about your everyday life goals, such as forging social relationships, acquiring wealth, and rising up in societal rank. Thus, Stoicism wasn't opposed to pursuing pleasure, but it's a wrong notion to believe that it advocated pursuing pleasure. The Stoic philosophy regards both pain and pleasure as a matter of fact indifference. In effect, proponents of Stoicism neither advocated pursuing pleasure nor avoiding it, as in Buddhism. They simply spoke about pleasure as a means of fatal distraction from virtue. Thus, greed, lust, and other pleasure-seeking desires can prevent us from leading a more virtuous life, according to Stoicism. The pleasure wasn't viewed as something evil, though pursuing it was believed to be a foolish decision. Stoicism did call upon avoiding certain pleasures in specific instances as a way to achieve other, higher ends. Stoics agreed to the view that the sage was likelier to be happy and liberated from distress. However, unlike Buddhism and other philosophies, this wasn't viewed as the goal. It was seen as a mere byproduct or side effect than the actual end goal. This can best explain the typical Stoic approach toward pleasure and pain. Stoics believed that virtue was the ultimate pleasure, but not the sole pleasure. Hence, it didn't stop people from chasing pleasure. It only spoke about avoiding pleasure when it interfered with leading a virtuous life. This also doesn't automatically imply that the Stoics were asked to lead a pleasurable life. According to Stoic teachings, a person lacking virtues will be in distress, even if he also engages in pleasure. The lack of virtue is what is fundamental to mankind's distress, not pleasure or lack of it. You can have or not have the pleasure and still not lead a thriving life because it isn't virtuous. A sage or wise man who practices the joy of virtue will rarely experience distress. The notion that Stoicism is about appreciation of life's pleasures stems primarily from A Guide to the Good Life by Irvine. It debunks the impact of virtue in Stoic philosophy, and this is evident throughout the publication, thus leading to various interpretations of Stoicism. Conclusion. Thank you for downloading the book Stoic Philosophy, Ancient Wisdom for Self-Control, Perseverance, and Tranquility of Mind. I sincerely hope it was able to offer you a deep and insightful understanding of the philosophy of Stoicism and a sneak peek of its practical applications. Look out for Book 2 in the series for more practical wisdom nuggets. The next step is to understand the true essence of the Stoicism philosophy and apply it in your everyday life to experience greater joy, discover a sense of fulfillment, overcome challenges, and live a more enriched life. Lastly, if you enjoyed listening to this book, please take the time to share your thoughts by writing a review on Amazon. It would be highly appreciated. Here's to leading a rewarding, peaceful, and fulfilling 21st century Stoic life.